Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, along with Matt Shiles and his commission attire. So commission is blue, by the way, and if I was going to, I'll go ahead. Let's give you a quiz there, Matt. Give me the other colors. Give me the other colors. What color is connect?
Orange.
What color is cultivate?
Green.
And what color is care?
Purple.
Okay, well, there you go. I would be interested to see how many of our staff could actually get that right now.
I mean, they're in the foyer.
Well, they're in the foyer, but that don't mean anything.
We have a all staff this week.
Yeah, you think we ought to do a quiz?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do
I
it.
think we ought to. Yeah. All right. Remind me tomorrow to do a quiz.
You can't tell anybody that I suggested this.
Okay.
Because they're gonna get mad at me.
Well, I asked you, so you got it. But yeah.
But you Extra Takes listeners are gonna.
Yeah.
This is gonna come out after the all staff, so.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say I wouldn't even say that there is this in-depth reasoning for the colors, even though I could say green cultivate is this growth.
Grow, sure.
But I don't even know. Purple is more royalty.
Yeah, well, and blue was already the surf shirt, so I think that was kind of natural for there to be blue.
Yeah. So there. I don't think there's a deep meaning behind each
color.
Then
I think we already had the orange lanyards. So for Connect, so orange. So I think there was already kind of default of two of them, and then green, and then I'm not sure where purple came from. I think there's probably a good reason for that one.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Well, anyways, hey.
And you have a nice shirt on.
Gotta believe. Now I know so many people have asked me about these shirts. Now here's why. So 2 weeks ago, the short sleeve hoodie, I designed that myself on Amazon, which is why the N was so big. It was like a military police patch.
Did you know it was going to be that?
Oh,
big?
I did not know it was going to be that huge. So those are things like, and here's the thing that we are actually working on having a mechanism by which we have when I say a constant supply of various kinds of shirts, because these shirts we order them for, but we don't want to do that. We actually want something other than just t-shirts. Like even the t-shirt that I had on this past weekend, there was actually a Nike t-shirt. They had them on sale.
Yeah,
months ago, and they're a $40 t-shirt that I got for $10, and so I bought as many because it's just hard to find really quality like plain white shirts, and so I had us print on those, and so we're actually looking for a company that has different kinds of cuts so that we can actually put our own print on. And so and again, this is something that has been a discussion of ours behind the scenes, and so we've been learning more and more about kind of the apparel and I would say the wearable industry.
Yeah.
And so we're very close to because it really was. And maybe if anybody out there listening, maybe you know more about this area than we do, but we've actually had to find some people who know about this area. But I actually love short sleeve hoodies. I think that's kind of at least the winterized Florida version of a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
But I love that. And so it was a very thin, but it was not that good of quality actually. And so what we're wanting to do is find a company that has all of these different kinds of cuts that we like, from short sleeve hoodies. Like this is a collarless polo shirt that I actually love wearing. And so, but again, I took this out of my own closet and we found, so what we're trying to find is something that I would love to wear. Again, maybe you can call it selfish, but again, not just a t-shirt every weekend, that. And so we're very close to finding the place that we can order from so that we can sell not only the Believe stuff, but even other things down the line, because we love wearing our series. We love wearing our faith.
Sure.
So we're even looking at creating a label called Creator Made. Made by creators for the creator. So that's what we're looking for. So stay tuned. I know that we have drummed up a lot of at least acknowledgement, and then even awareness, and then even hey, I want that shirt. Like I think one guy wanted to take it off my back, at least my short sleeve hoodie, and I'm like, well, no, I don't. I
need to wear this.
I need to wear this one more day. So,
funny.
Anyway.
That's so funny.
Maybe that's the way we can get more tithes and offerings. Is like I'll just take the shirt off my back and give it to the highest.
Is
bidder.
that what we're gonna do?
And we'll give it to the tithes, and it goes to more ministry and mission. So
to the highest bidder.
The highest bidder.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I don't know if you would want the shirts that I wear after I preach because they smell. I sweat a lot.
First 5 minutes, I'm never quite sure how we're gonna start. I have a plan every week, but you have the first couple minutes in it.
I feel the void.
You feel the void.
Maybe you ought to start doing the welcome.
No, I like it. I probably get more. Comments about this first couple minutes than anything else. Yeah. So let's dig in. We are. I'm excited to talk about these two parts of this sermon, part 1 and part 2. And this was week 4 of the Believe series. This was Believe Isn't the End, Believe is Only the Beginning. And we're in Exodus 19, and this is February 8th and 9th, 2025. So the main point is Believe frees you to pursue the prize you've been given and live out the purpose you were made for. And we had part 1, part 2. Part 1 was the 5 truths of how Believe is only the beginning. And then part 2 was laying out the strategic vision and what is the foundation for Believe. Now the foundation, with the foundation for Believe, what are the greater things and greater days that Northland is trusting God for? And you laid out that strategic vision. So I definitely want to make sure we spend a good chunk of time on that second part. But before we get there, you laid out these 5 truths. I'll read these for us, and then I'll have a kind of an opening question for us. So first is Believe is the beginning of a relationship with God. Second, Believe is the beginning of pursuing the prized possession of which you've been given. So that's the treasured possession piece. Third is Believe is the beginning of living out the global purpose to which you were called, and that's the kingdom of priests piece. Fourth is Believe is the beginning of embodying the distinctives of God's kingdom among the kingdoms of man. That's the holy nation piece. And finally, Believe is the beginning of feasting on and living off the word of God. So as we start, and we'll kind of spend a little bit of time on, maybe not all, but some of these 5 truths, just overall, how do you feel about this series and how it came together?
I really loved the series in its total.
Yeah.
Because doing a deep dive on Believe, I've never done that before, but to really walk through the components and the elements that you won't believe unless you have a need.
Yeah.
And so to really help our church understand that every human being has a need, regardless of whether they realize it or not. And so part of our job is to get them to understand that they have a need.
Sure.
Right? So it really having to drill down on that, and then to also drill down, I think some people saw the profoundness of even the second message in the series where we talked about it is a tall order for people to believe. Yeah. So we're dealing with, and so again, trying to make these connections. So if only 41% of Orlando Metro is religious, because we talked about that. Well, then that means, if you do the math, then that means, 59% of the people are not religious. So they have a whole nother worldview. And so we got to get them to believe that they have a need. And many of them would say that they have a need, but maybe they think a lot like the Egyptians do. Oh, well, I can meet my needs on my own. And so to even make that shift, to let go of your worldview and to cling to this worldview, that is a tall order. Yeah. And then maybe some might, again, in that 59%, maybe some, they feel so enslaved because maybe we're at the bottom of the social structure. Mm-hmm. And so they want to cry out for help, but maybe they're looking to the government for help. Sure. And they're not looking. So I don't know what it might be, but it's a tall order to get people to drop what they are clinging to in their belief right now, and to cling to Jesus as the source of their only, need that would, the only source that would meet that need.
Sure.
So again, that's how it kind of correlates right now. But that's where I was like, I don't know if people really. Again, I love doing the deep dive, but I don't know if people really understand the profoundness of the shift that people have to make to cling to Jesus as a source who meets their needs.
Yeah.
Which is, again, that object of faith.
Yeah.
And once you find that object of faith that meets your needs, particularly your essential needs, you'll embed your life into theirs. Mm-hmm. And then, looking at that third piece of, all right, so you say you believe, but to sustain that belief.
Sure.
And I think that even what we're seeing in terms of the trends right now is that there are a lot of people who, in some sense, have claimed Jesus, who have said that Jesus is important, who has, in some sense, tried to demonstrate Jesus's importance through, going to church. But now what we're seeing is that we're living in a culture now that does have a weak church. That we've seen church attendance in decline. We're seeing the deconstruction of faith. Mm-hmm. We're seeing in some sense a division within the church on the left and the right. I mean, and so we are living in a day and age where it's a very, very weak church. And so, do we even know what we're trying to sustain anymore?
Right.
And so setting all of that up to now, like to this one to go like, but I had to set up just how hard it is for people to believe, and then if you truly believe, then that's just the beginning. And here's what that is the beginning of. Like so.
Yeah.
So when you do it, and so I broke down believe. But when you look at it in just one setting, you're like, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, for me, now again, I don't know if I did it justice. I don't know if I communicated as well as I could have. But like when you look at it in that way, it makes so much sense. I need to believe. Mm-hmm. It really is hard to believe because I got to let go of some things. Yeah. And then do I really believe? Because if I really believe, I'll sustain that belief. Yeah. And then, okay, if I do have the right belief and it is sustained, then what it shows me is that my belief is the beginning of these things.
Well, right, because that belief is for a greater purpose.
And to dive into that prized possession is that I'm diving into learning about my prized possession, my prized treasure, while also living out my purpose.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that you had talked about, is Jesus your special prized possession, and then even that other point, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I think as we, as you were digging into what each of those meant, you were really illustrating the depths of it, the complexities of it, and the depths of it. And I do think it helped illustrate, hey, this is just the start of it.
Yeah. Well, and what I wanted people to see too, which is sad, is that this was Israel's beginning mission statement. Mm-hmm. And at least that older generation never experienced it. And again, this is what's mind-boggling. They're just 2 months into their journey. This is the third month. This is the start of the third month. Yeah. So they've already spent 2 months kind of in transition.
Yeah.
They get to the mountain.
Yeah.
This is the sign that God's with Moses. And God's going to give them the mission statement, the vision statement. Believe is the beginning of these things. And they never realize it. Now the younger generation, and again, it was only supposed to be a 4-week series, but I could in some sense extend this series and look in Joshua. And so this is where they're going to have to spend. Here's great. They're going to have to spend right at 40 years minus 2 months. They'll spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness, never living out this vision. Mm-hmm. The younger generation who was under 20, they're going to be, at that point, they're going to at least be 60 and younger. Mm-hmm. And they will be the ones experiencing the beginning of belief. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who will experience the greater things in greater days.
Yeah.
And I really tried to make, I really tried to stress, like, as I was making the transition from the scriptures to the strategic vision, just because it's greater things and greater days doesn't mean easier things in easier days.
Yeah, I got that.
Because they're going into this promised land, and they are going to have to fight. They are going to have to continue to trust. They're going to have to march around Jericho 7 times for 7 days.
Yeah.
And go. This is not what I read in the latest warfare journal. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, so they're going to do some things that's not easy.
Yeah.
But they're believing God.
Yeah.
And experiencing the greater things in greater days.
But they still didn't do that fully.
Well, no, see, and that's why they have Israel has the roller coaster of a history.
Yeah.
The closest they came to experiencing the greater things in greater days was under David and Solomon. So they had about 80 years of the golden age.
Yeah.
Which is why with David, God is going to promise to have a descendant of David sit on his throne forever.
Sure.
Yeah. Because he had a heart, because that's what he said, right? He had a heart after God.
Yeah.
He was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what really Israel's history exposes is that they didn't have a heart after God's own heart. And so, but the closest thing that you get to a golden age of Israel is with David and Solomon, where God gave David rest from his enemies, where there was peace, there was an abundance, there was this well-being. Same thing with Solomon.
Yeah.
But then the nation actually begins to crumble after Solomon with Rehoboam, and then the nation is split, and I mean it's just an unraveling because of their disobedient heart. So that's the closest that they ever get. So you're right. So that's where I'm like, but you see this pattern though. So they didn't even make it to the promised land because of their disobedience.
Yeah.
This younger generation gets there, but they don't even fully obey because they don't wipe out the inhabitants of the land. They leave a good, hefty portion of them that will be the Achilles heel, that would actually be the anchor that just weighs them down for them to follow after other gods and disobey.
They didn't experience full shalom.
They didn't. But, and this is what makes the new covenant so important, is that we do, because that doesn't mean that we're perfect, but we experience what Israel couldn't because of Jesus' death and resurrection. And when we truly believe in him, he puts his spirit within us, which then the spirit moves and guides us.
Yeah.
And so when we're prone to wonder, the spirit brings us back.
Yeah.
And so that, the whole idea of support is that now we've been given the support spirit, and we also been given the support of his church. So the body of Christ who believes in Christ, who also have the Spirit of God living in it. So now we have the Spirit moving in and through us and together keeping us on track. And so that's a huge difference that we have, and that's why I wanted to show the correlation between Exodus 19 and 1 Peter 2, is that we've been given something better. Even Peter says that they disobeyed, and they were meant to. They were destined to, because they didn't have the right heart.
Yeah.
But now we have a better covenant. We have a better relationship. And now this covenant isn't predicated on our performance, because we cannot perform to the standards of God. The covenant that we are under is been predicated upon the performance of Christ, and he has been perfect. He has kept the letter of the law. He is God incarnate. And so now we have entered into this covenant with God based upon what Jesus has done. Jesus has put his spirit in us. And so we have now a whole different experience of believing because of what Jesus has accomplished in his death and resurrection and what he has given us to sustain belief. Israel did not have what it took to sustain belief. And they showed us.
Wow. Well, in one of those parts, we'll jump down to number 4 in this part 1, is believing is the beginning of embodying the distinctives of God's kingdom among the kingdoms of man. That was the holy nation piece. And you had this quote, you said, it was a bit of a mic drop for me. Holiness expresses the wholesomeness of our King and exposes the holes in the fracture in humanity. You said the reason why people don't want to come to church is that we haven't expressed the wholesomeness of our King. you say Jesus from your lips, but Jesus isn't coming out of your life. Whew.
Well, that's what God told Israel, and through Isaiah, is that you profess me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. And see, and that's where I'm like, believe is not just the sentiment that you verbalize. It is. Yeah. It is a belief that you internalize that is that is now demonstrated in your life.
Yeah.
And that's what I was really trying to drive home, which is what I'm trying to unpack too with the strategic vision. Yeah. It's not just about gathering.
Yeah.
It's about demonstrating something holistically.
Yeah.
It's demonstrating something spiritually, it's demonstrating something socially and how we relate to one another, and it's demonstrating something civilly, culturally, in what we do and how we do it. Because that's exactly what God is setting up. He's setting up His nation. He's setting up His kingdom of how they are to relate to Him, how they relate to one another, how they're to relate to the marginalized, the vulnerable, how they are to relate to their work, what they do in the world, how they do it. So it's this kingdom, it's this nation, it's holistic, and so believe was supposed to infiltrate and impact, influence every area of their life. And so their redemption 2 months into it is just the beginning. Their belief is just the beginning of this life in God.
Yeah.
And so when we believe in Jesus, it's just the beginning of our life in Him and the King and His kingdom. And there's so much to even unpack in that strategic vision. But that so I wanted to really drill down.
Yeah.
And again, I think I left going, I don't know if I did it justice, to be honest. I don't know if
it's part of all of it.
Well, or I don't know if, because I just think that we have been conditioned to think about Jesus as this privatized faith. Yeah. We have been so conditioned to think, following Jesus is just coming to church, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. But I will say your faithfulness to His church is actually a really good reflection on your faithfulness to Him. Because you cannot say, and this is what the Bible would stress, it's not Josh saying this, so if people want to get mad at me, get mad at Jesus. Because if you're not faithful to His bride, it's really hard for me to even accept that you're faithful to Him. So if we have had this loss of faithfulness to His church, but here's what I would also say, is that His church hasn't been quite faithful to Him in expressing the fact that you're to be faithful to Him in all areas of your life, beginning with His corporate body.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I feel like I just don't do. It's just hard to untangle the cobwebs of what we've been conditioned to think about church, and what this vision is to try to untangle those cobwebs, to say it begins in the body, but it's not to stay in the body.
Well said. So after that, you said you gave us a principle. From the fifth point, believe is the beginning of feasting on and living off the Word of God. The principle was they believed in Yahweh and therefore were supposed to behave like Yahweh. And for me, this was such a great launching off point and pivot into that second part that we're going to get to. But it demonstrates how it's just the beginning, because it shows how this belief in Yahweh is just the beginning of the transformation. We'd call it sanctification that will continue, needs to continue our entire life. And anytime we talk about actions, obedience, I think some depending on your faith background or upbringing could push back a bit in terms of works-based.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of the tension there.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what Paul told Titus, and he mentions good works a myriad of times in that small little letter to Titus. But we were saved for good works. Faith, James says this, faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And this is the idea, is that if you believe, you will behave. Whatever you believe in, you're going to behave, which is part of, again, going back to the concept of faith, is It's the confidence, the belief, the trust in an object to meet your needs. And then whatever that object is that you perceive is going to meet your needs, you're going to embed your life into theirs. And the whole idea is that you will embed your life into the object of faith, and you will begin to behave like the object of your faith.
Yeah.
You will take on the form and the nature of whatever you put your faith in. Yeah. That's the whole idea of believe, behave.
Yeah.
So when I do that whole faith framework, and I didn't do it this series, I didn't put it up in this series, but you have in the left quadrant, you have worldview, then you have your purpose or your mission, then down on the left-hand quadrant, you have ethics, and then on the bottom right, you have spiritual practices, and in the middle is your object of faith.
Yeah.
So your object of faith will determine your beliefs, your worldview, and your purpose, and then it will determine your behaviors, your ethics, how you live your life, and what you practice spiritually to form and shape your faith muscles. So it's believe, behave.
Yeah.
And it's just where I'm like, the church says they believe, but here's the thing, your behavior will tell you what you actually believe.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, your behavior will tell you what you believe.
Yeah,
well said. So let's get into this part 2.
Okay.
I try to hurry us along because I know, man, that first part, that was a whole full sermon in itself, and we could just spend the whole time on it. But part 2 was getting into unveiling the strategic vision for the next 25 years.
Yeah.
So you didn't get to this point until the last 20 minutes of the series.
Yeah.
Why was that?
It's the start. So we haven't concluded anything. So
interesting.
And that's where I think it probably almost kind of fell. It didn't fall on deaf ears, but it was almost like anticlimactic is what I felt. Where I wanted to go home and go, that was a bust. You know, I did. You know, it was just because again, there was nothing to celebrate per se.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, other than redemption. Hey, we're redeemed, right? I mean, so it's like Israel. Again, it was the beginning of something. But what I wanted us to take away, I thought about this, is what did I really want us to take away?
Yeah.
I wanted us to take away how we will measure our effectiveness. And also a way for us to connect what we do in the coming months and years to a bigger vision.
Okay, talk more about that.
So it's a way to measure, because here's the thing, how do you measure whether or not you're being effective at what God's called you to? Well, think about Israel. How were they going to measure effectiveness? Well, we got to get in the land. We got to defeat all of the inhabitants.
All of them.
We got to defeat all of the inhabitants, and then they can measure the effectiveness by rest. This is what God was going to give them rest from their enemies. Well, they never defeated all of their enemies, so they never really had rest. So they can measure whether or not they were effective at what God had called them to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So part of a strategic vision is being able to measure whether or not you're being effective at what God has called you to do. So when you look at those 4 big buckets, you can actually fit those 4 big buckets into 3 big buckets that we see in Israel: spiritual, social, and cultural.
Oh, really?
They had these spiritual laws, these more moral laws of how they were going to relate to God. Then they had these ceremonial laws of how they were going to relate to God through the temple system. And then they had these, when I say even civil and, these civil laws that you could break it down into how they would engage the marginalized and the vulnerable, and then how they would engage in their work and in kind of the larger cultural setting as a nation.
Yeah.
So, I'll give you a for instance about them being able to measure their effectiveness in a civil way. So every 7 years they were to give the land rest. Well, they were able to measure that. We're to cultivate this land for 6 years. On the 7th year, you better let that land have some rest.
Did they do that?
No. And you can read in Jeremiah. I don't know the exact passage, but they never followed the Sabbath land of rest.
Because then even the Jubilee.
And even the Jubilee, every 50 years, they were to give land back to people. They didn't even do that. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that they didn't do, but they could have measured their effectiveness.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So another way is how they treated the stranger. So like Moabites, coming in, or how the Queen of Sheba, again, this is a stranger, how they would receive a foreigner, how they would show them hospitality.
Yeah.
Like these are all ways that you can measure whether or not they did that.
Yeah.
So when you look at our 4 big categories of church and campuses, missional communities, microchurches, that's kind of one big kind of spiritual bucket.
Yeah.
You can also put that in the kind of even the ceremonial bucket.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you look at Mercy Road initiatives. Those are all of the ways that we care for the vulnerable, the marginalized, those who are in need. So that's a social mechanism, a social civil mechanism by how we are relating to those who need help, who have needs.
Yeah.
And then the commerce bucket is how we conduct business. Okay, so we have an education realm called the co-op, and we probably will be changing its name. I don't know, just so that we can make sure that we're able to communicate what it is, because not everybody understands what a co-op is.
Sure.
I didn't even know what a co-op was a couple of years ago when I got here. And then we're trying to leverage our building in a business, in a kingdom business manner. Because we're wanting to image God well in how we steward our resources. Same thing that Israel's supposed to do. Here's the land. They were actually to engage in trade with nations outside. And they were even able to charge an interest. See, Israel was not to charge an interest to their own people.
Yeah.
They were to be interest-free to their own people.
Yeah.
But in terms of surrounding nations, they were able to charge interest.
Yeah.
There was a business mechanism to trade. So what we want to do is that we want to employ some commerce, healthy business practices that embody a kingdom value of a benevolent owner, but also with savvy biblical business principles. Okay? So now we have these commerce entities, and so that's a civil way of how we can engage culture. And so when you look at those 4 big buckets, it breaks it up into spiritual, social, and cultural. I'll give you another breakdown. People have heard me talk about exile, and how in the book of Daniel, you have these 3 spheres being seen again. You have Daniel and then you see the passage in Jeremiah 29, I think verse 7, where it says, "Seek the peace of the city in which I've called you." Well, how would they seek the peace? How would they seek the shalom, the total wholesome well-being of the city? Well, they would seek it spiritually, socially, and culturally. And I've communicated it in this way, is that there would be a proclamation piece that Daniel and then his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, there would be times where Babylon would want them to do this, or later on the Persians would want them to do this, but they couldn't do it because it would impede upon them being faithful to Yahweh. And so there was this proclamation piece that, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, King Darius, you actually aren't in charge. Yahweh is actually in charge, and we got to obey him, not you. And so there's this spiritual proclamation that they're demonstrating an inner peace in a chaotic city. But then there's a preservative piece. There's a social piece. Because you have the Babylonians the magicians could not interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's vision. And Nebuchadnezzar was going to kill all of them. But Daniel said, don't kill them. I'll give you the vision and the interpretation in 24 hours. And so here Daniel he's working to preserve peace. But then you also look at Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Where did they work? They worked for King Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, talking about a job. And so there was this partnering piece. So there was this cultural, civil piece that they had as they would work for the common good of Babylon. And so what this framework is, this strategic vision, is outlining the embodiment of God's kingdom spiritually, socially, culturally, embodying God's kingdom in a proclamation way, in a preservative way, and in a partnering way. Because most of the people that we have coming to our cooperative program right now, our early learning center, most of them don't go to Northland.
Yeah.
Obviously, most of the people that come and that use ecclesial school, most of them do not come. Well over the majority do not come to Northland. So even in those two entities, there is a partnering piece with the greater community. Mercy Road, most, I would actually even say most of these families that are dropping off their adults with special needs, varying exceptionalities, do not come to Northland. Many of the single moms that they weren't in Northland. And so these are mechanisms by which we are seeking the shalom, the peace, socially and culturally. And so now this framework gives us a way by which we can measure God's work in and through us as a body that is supposed to embody the values of the King and his kingdom.
That's great. So we talked about the 4 big buckets. Let's look at missional communities and specifically microchurches, because you had mentioned you wanted to spend more time on that. So let's make sure we cover that. So what do you want to cover for microchurches?
Well, so microchurches. So I put on the slide, microchurches are 50 and less that display the 6 markers of what it means to be a New Testament church. Okay, so a couple things about microchurches is that we even know like the younger generation sometimes have a very difficult time coming to a big building like this that the church has spent so much money on. And so they want something a little bit more intimate, maybe even more authentic. And that also even goes for some in the older generational camp of going, they wouldn't come to a big, large gathering like this. Yeah. But maybe they'll go to something more intimate with a friend. Yeah. Hey, will you come over to my house? Hey, we got a community center that we meet in, and what we do is we watch and we watch service, we participate, and we do a meal afterwards. And so, again, very high relational, but more intimate. But what we're wanting to also guard against is a glorified small group.
Yeah, this isn't just a Bible study.
It's not just a Bible study. So what we're looking at is 50 and under, because once you hit 50 or more, your structure has to change. So that's why we're kind of putting a cap under a microchurch. And so some people have asked, well, what happens when you get bigger than 50? Well, then you either have to change your structure and you become more of a campus model, or you duplicate the microchurch.
You multiply.
So you either go down the street to another community center, start meeting in another home, and you start duplicating, because here are the 6 markers of a New Testament church. Now, I've borrowed these 6 markers from one of my friends, Ed Stetzer, and I think there's really, there's another person, Mark Dever, who he wrote a book years ago entitled The 9 Marks of a Healthy Church. So he has 9 markers. Yeah. Ed kind of has condensed it to 6 markers, in which I actually like his markers. Yeah. So he talks about the authority of Scripture. So if you're going to be a New Testament church, regardless of your size, you have to say that the Scriptures are our authority. So we're going to live by the Scriptures. They are the final source of authority, not what somebody else has said, not what Martin Luther said, not what John Calvin said, not what this denomination has said. No, what the Bible says. Like, that is the final authority. The second thing is biblical leadership. So when it comes to biblical leadership, there needs to be at least a pastor and a deacon, and so pastors or elders, I use those terms synonymously. We've said here at Northland, we do have both pastors and elders. Pastors are paid, elders are lay, and so they oversee. So we have a group of lay elders who oversee the legal, the financial, the constitutional, and our primary theologies to make sure that we stay in line within our primary theological doctrines. Okay, but the pastors are paid to oversee and to manage the ministry and the mission and the expansion of that. So that's where when you look at biblical leadership, you have pastors or an elder. Or when I say a pastor or an elder, again, with the smaller body, you just might have one pastor and maybe one deacon who's serving the body, caring for the body in some kind of shape, form, or fashion. Okay, so you have a biblical leadership model, then you have biblical Christ-centered preaching and teaching. And so with our micro churches, they're piping in the service where they're having that Christ-centered preaching, teaching. Yeah. But they also have smaller gatherings, whether they're smaller women's gathering, smaller men's gathering, or smaller Bible study throughout the week, throughout the month, where they're still doing Christ-centered teaching. Yeah. The fourth is the observance of the sacraments or the ordinances. So sacraments, ordinances, same thing. Now, I think Catholics have 7 sacraments. Well, we don't have 7 sacraments. Like they would say marriage is a sacrament. Okay, so what we believe that the Bible teaches that there's only 2 sacraments or 2 ordinances, and that's baptism and the Lord's Supper or communion. So baptism only happens once, and then Lord's Supper happens often. And so in a micro church, they're doing the sacrament. So somebody comes to know Christ, we're going to baptize them, and then we're going to do the sacrament, the ordinance of Lord's Supper, communion. The fifth is be in covenant community. So that means there is a partnership and accountability now. Is we're sharpening one another. Yeah. How are you doing? Which here, that's why we launched membership again. Yeah. Because we believe that there should be some kind of accountability that exists in a church body of how we're doing in living out what Jesus has called us to live out. Okay? So there has to be when I say more of this covenant community, partnership, accountability. And then the last is pursuing God's mission local and globally. So that means a heart to reproduce and to expand God's mission here on earth, which is to redeem a people from every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every people group. So what I've seen and what a lot of people have seen in terms of these like more micro churches over the last decade or so is that they tend to be a glorified small group because they are deconstructing the large church, model, and they're in some sense even railing against the large church model, but they don't have any desire to grow and to expand. Well, if you don't have any desire to grow or expand or to multiply disciples, multiply, micro churches, then again, from a New Testament perspective, I don't know how you can say that you are a church, because what Jesus gives his disciples in Matthew 28 and Acts 1:8 is this reproduction, this multiplication mindset and mentality that you are to reproduce disciples, and through the reproduction of disciples, you will actually see the reproduction of churches.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's a good distinction in terms of, microchurches are a different model, and what we're creating and developing here is that this model does not compete against the institutional larger church model, but it can actually complement, and that's what I'm really excited about moving forward, is showing that these different models can actually coexist and complement well. They're contextualized. So that's what's exciting. Yeah, as a microchurch grows in numbers, I think often because of the DNA of that model, they'll probably multiply into new microchurches, but it is possible that they will grow, or multiple microchurches could grow and combine into a satellite campus, depending on the location. But at that point, like you said, it would kind of shift structure.
It would shift structure.
It would shift the models, and then you'd have to consider the leadership and all of that. Yep. So I think that's helpful. I definitely think that we'll probably snip that portion and use that for our microchurch training, because I appreciate you going through those 6. So I want to move on to this idea, the actual number. Okay. As you were digging into it, you talked about engaging and reaching. Yeah. And I think this is a helpful conversation. So a couple words that you threw out. You talked about engaging, you talked about reaching, and you talked about net reach. So let's define each of those. Okay. So how about I define them and you tell me if I'm right?
Okay.
So engaging, this is anybody that we are physically interacting with.
Yep.
Reaching is, and we'll get into net reach. The reaching is the net reach of that physical engagement. So the net effect of that engagement from the physical.
Yeah.
And then the net reach is just essentially saying unique individuals. So making sure that we're not double, triple, quadruple counting people that are involved in various ways.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'll give you, kind of give you a for instance. All right, so the church, we're going off of our average weekly number, and that average weekly number would really more than likely include the family unit. Mm-hmm. Okay. So then the other thing that we're also even adding, because we have middle school and high school that they have their kind of separate midweek gathering, and there are actually a lot of students that do not come on the weekend, or their parents come on the weekend, but they'll come midweek. So we're just including that number, but we're not including the net reach there, because there is an element where many of them are coming. So we feel like we're kind of canceling that number out. So we're just taking the raw data, the raw numbers of our weekly attendance and our midweek attendance, adding that number.
Sure.
But then when you look at the Mercy Road initiatives, all right, so we have adults with special needs, and then child care. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, somebody's got to drop them off.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at the net reach being at least times 3, because you're so basically you're looking at,
we're including the family unit.
So we're including the family unit because of the nature of that initiative.
Sure.
Okay, so that's where when you look at co-op, somebody's got to drop off that 18-month-old to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay, and so we're taking the net reach of a family unit, a mom and a dad, and at least one other child, because you might have some, maybe it's a single parent, maybe they have 5 children. So we're just kind of taking a raw average of 2 children per home. And so that's where we're getting, kind of getting this number of a net reach. And so, but again, the church number is just going off of the average number and not a net reach.
Sure. So have you thought about breaking down, of that 100K, how much we'll be engaging and how much we'll be reaching?
No, I haven't gotten that scientific, because here's where I know that number seems big right now.
You know what's funny about that?
What?
You threw that number out to me when we were in South Korea.
Yeah.
And it felt big. It doesn't feel so big anymore.
If you here's what I like. The reason why I don't want to get into that nuance is because this is what you're going to hear on Extra Takes. I actually think that number is too small.
I feel that now. Until I dig into the percentage, because you say 2.5%, but right now we're at 0.01%.
Oh, I see. I didn't even do those numbers. The 2.6, 2.765.
Yeah. So
and what? Yeah.
So right now the 4,000 of the 2.7 million. That's 0.014. So we're looking to move from 0.014, so or 0.1% to 2.5%, which seems it's an act of God, but the 100,000 number, including reach, I do think that
well, it would be interesting. And again, I didn't do all of this homework, but when Northland was at its height, and had co-op, and I don't know when CAC was started, but they had satellite campuses.
It was after the height, yeah.
So what would have our net reach been? So let's just say, because at the height, Northland had at least probably 12 to 15,000 every week that they had a net reach. So what would have been? I don't know you would have to look up the percentage of a.
Yeah.
Let's just put 15,000 with a 2 million population.
Yeah.
So. I mean, I guess I can.
I'll do it. You talk. I'll do the math.
Hey, Siri.
Let's see who can do it faster.
What is the percentage of 2 million people and 15,000?
0.75%.
0.75%.
Yeah.
So 7.5%.
No. 0.75.
Oh, 0.75.
Yeah. So not even a percent.
Not even a percent.
And we're at 0.1.
Yeah.
And the past was 0.7, and you're laying out a vision for 2.5%.
Yeah.
And we both feel that might be low.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that gets the point of like it as you lay it out, it is fully overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
Which I think is
a good
thing.
Well, it is a good thing, because if it's not bigger than us, it's too small for God. But here's so this is the key, and that's why I wanted to share the chart. Because if you want to sustain growth, that leads to momentum, that leads to multiplication, that leads to movement.
Yeah.
You have to sustain your mission, your vision, your values.
Yeah.
And if you study, just take Northland's history, at some point there was a change in mission, vision, and values. And I'm not, again, maybe somebody can get mad at me, but I can promise you, when I start reading the Orlando Sentinel and it tells me that thousands of people left Northland because of political stuff, it shows me that something changed. So that's the reason why that MVV on that organizational process, that MVV cannot change.
Mission, vision, values. Yeah.
So that has to. And then what you see with churches, you see this in business, you see this in organization. Typically, churches change pastors quite a bit. Yeah, every 5 years, the average is every 5 years a church gets a new pastor. Well, when you get new leadership, what tends to change?
All of it. The culture, mission, vision, values, the congregants, so much change.
So this is where it's incumbent. Like if we're going to have to, God's got to be in it, because that mission, the vision, the values have to stay the same. Now, what changes is your structure and your strategy.
And honestly, we have to be very, very open-handed with those.
Yeah.
We can get very, very closed fist with both of those.
Yes.
But we have to be really close fist with the MVV, the mission, vision, values.
Because think about,
open with the other two.
Think about some of the structural and strategic changes in the New Testament. Okay. So in Acts chapter 6, there were some structural elements that actually needed to be implemented for the church actually to care for the Hellenistic widows.
Yeah.
But they had to go. They had to change structure, because the apostles could no longer manage the actual structure. So what did they have to do? They had to go find seven leaders who loved Jesus, who were full of the Spirit, so that they called it wait on tables.
Yeah, because it was taking them away from the ministry of the word and prayer.
So that was a structural thing that they had to receive, and they couldn't. They couldn't, in some sense, call on Bartholomew whenever they wanted to. They could no longer get Andrew whenever they wanted to. I mean, so there was the structural thing that there was this additional structure that they had to add to care for the body well. There was also a strategic element of they had to now go outside of Jerusalem. But you actually see that the early church, they did not start going outside of Jerusalem until persecution broke out, because it was really hard for them to implement that strategy of reaching Gentiles, reaching Samaritans. And so, yes, you have to hold tightly the mission and hold loosely the methods. Because if you begin to worship the methods or begin to worship what you feel is comfortable to you, then at some point you will find yourself not moving in step with the Spirit of God to embrace the discomfort so that the kingdom can be expanded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. So let's move on to there. We've got a couple minutes left in terms of next steps. So the way you transitioned us was It very much felt like it was leading to, okay, now this is the ask. This is the money ask, but that wasn't it. What are we asking from you? It was to believe. Believe in two ways: partnering with us and promoting what God is doing in and through us. It feels very simple but very profound, and I think it highlights it's the start.
It really is. It's just the beginning.
It's just the start.
It really is. It's the beginning, because I feel like we as a staff, we've been working extremely hard just to get us to this place where we feel like we could even begin to dream. Like, I don't think people. I mean, I'm not. I don't want to be sounding an alarm, because there's no alarm to sound that things are dire. But 3 years ago, things were dire. I mean, you've been here, so you can tell. How dire were they?
Yeah, so when you look at the life cycle of churches and the life cycle of organizations, and you look at the start all the way up to flourishing, all the way down to death, we have been on every single point, and like we probably should have died. I mean, and that's how dire it was.
Well, I mean, I know. Yeah, so that's where, like, again, we're not there, but this is where there's been so many challenges, though, because when you get down to kind of you are managing your own death, but then you've got to turn things around so that you can even begin to kind of get on the upswing where you even think about life again.
Yeah.
And so we've worked extremely, and I say we, it's not been me. Yeah. I mean, it's been a team effort just to put the right people in the place, to make sure that we have the right systems and structures, make sure that we do have a pipeline of how do we, in some sense, assimilate new people? How does the children's ministry, how do they respond, and how do they follow up with kids, or what do they do back there, and what do we like all of that stuff? Like, I mean, it's just been, and we knew that a new pastor coming in, there was going to be at least 3 to 5 years of transitional time. So as I kind of come to the close of my 3 years here and begin my 4th, I feel like there's been a lot of work where we can even get to a place where we can even believe again. But this is where, I almost feel like it did fall flat, because there was this climactic, can we just begin to believe? And that's the thing, can we just begin to believe for greater things and greater days? But this is the thing, though. It's the beginning of faithfulness. And maybe even drawing that home is what God was calling them to in Exodus 19, was just the beginning of faithfulness.
Sustained.
Would you just do these things? Will you get to know me? Yeah. Will you dive deep into me, understanding that I'm your prized possession and you are mine? Will you just understand that I have created you, I've made you for mission, I've made you for a greater purpose that is outside the walls of your nation? Can you just believe that you're supposed to be distinct, that you're supposed to talk differently, you're supposed to have marriages that are different, that you're supposed to parent different, you're supposed to relate to your parents differently, you're supposed to work differently? Can you just start believing that now? And can you just start feasting on my word? Like, this is the beginning. And so that's where it wasn't this climactic, it was just this call to faithfulness. And this is one of the things I was telling people afterwards, is that I think the church has missed what God can do in 25 years just from a sustained faithfulness. Because we live in a culture where we now live in political whiplash, where a new regime comes in. And again, I'm not saying this to be political, but this is just whiplash. You have a Republican regime coming in, whiplashing everything, undoing everything that the previous administration. So in 8 years, if a Democrat comes in, and so we're looking for constant, quick whiplash of experience, but that's not how God works. Sure, does He move in mighty ways and powerful ways? He does, but His MO through His people is to work overtime through the faithfulness of His people, and the faithfulness of His people leads to the momentum, the multiplication, and the movement of His fruit. And so, can we? And this is where I'm asking. I can almost be begging at this point. If you are part of Northland, would you commit to believing God for greater things and greater days through your faithfulness? Because that's actually how you measure whether or not you believe, is through your faithfulness, not through what you say from your lips. So will you be faithful? Will you be faithful in partnering with us, one of his churches? And then will you be faithful in promoting? So here's another, and I hate, I never want to, because it's not about promoting myself, but will you share, even the podcast? Will you share the Facebook post, the Instagram post? Do you really believe what God is doing in and through us? Or is this just something that you tack on to your life? Because the church is never meant to be a tack on. It is plan A that God is using to advance his mission in the world. And one of my mentors used to say, the light that shines the furthest shines the brightest at home. You see, this impact, this 2.5% over the next 25 years, it doesn't even measure the impact of our global reach. It doesn't even measure the impact of our digital reach. We already have a digital reach of 133,000 on YouTube. Now, do we have 133,000 people watching it? No, but that is actually our subscription base. We have 23,000 on Facebook. Just think about the actual net reach if just 1,000 people shared the post. So this is where I want the church to begin to believe. If we would just be faithful in some small little things, God could take the small little things. He could take the few loaves and the few fish, and he can multiply it. And that's what I didn't want to get so emotional and and preachy. In this, I am right now, because I'm I just hope people get the vision of that. Is this just a little seed of faithfulness that compounded over time?
So let's do this. Can you pray over this series, pray over our time and the next 25 years as a way to end it?
Yeah. So, Father, you know our hearts, that we just want to beat after you. We want to be men and women after your own heart. We want to reflect you well, embody you well. The King and the kingdom that you have reconciled us and invited us into. There are so many people that even right now need you. They need you. And you have about 2,500 people that call themselves part of Northland. Just what you could do in the faithfulness of 2,500, what you could do through the faithfulness of just 12.
Amen.
And so, Spirit, the only way that we can be faithful is if you sustain that faithfulness over time. So may we never lose sight of your mission of existing to glorify you, to participate in your mission of redeeming a people from all peoples, by engaging neighbors and nations to be fully alive in King Jesus through the power of the Spirit, that we would connect with you and one another, that we would be cultivated as leaders and as disciples more into the image of Jesus, learning about our prized possession, that we would care for people and resources, that we would love them well, that we would meet physical needs, spiritual needs in the name of Jesus, and that we really would be commissioned to the Orlando metro area and beyond. Will you expand at your Spirit's pace? And we truly believe that greater things and greater days are yet to come, not because of who we are, but because of whose we are and who is working in and through us. Be glorified, be magnified, be praised. Do far more abundantly than we could ever ask, think, or imagine. Do immeasurably more, as Paul would write in the letter to the Ephesians. For it's in your name we pray, our King. Amen.
Amen.
Well, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.